PBS Company.
It's approaching 9 o'clock. Thanks for being with us this morning on Breakfast. Now, addiction is something that can happen to anyone, something the first of the winners of the Rachel Bland Podcast Award can testify to.
Melissa Rice and Jade Y, who are both in recovery, tell their story in Hooked, which is warts and all look at the reality of addiction and mental health.
The award, we actually talked about it here on the programme, was launched earlier this year in honour of the Radio 5 Live presenter Rachel Bland, who lost her life to breast cancer. Melissa and Jade will join us in a moment. Good morning. Lovely to see you this morning.
Good morning.
But first, should we have a little listen? Let's have a look at the podcast.
If anyone knows anyone who's ever had an alcohol detox, like, it's gruesome, it's grim. And my final drink was about 7 o'clock in the morning. And the hardest part about that final drink was the fact that I'd already accepted that I didn't want to drink anymore. And my mum had to pour me the drink from the advice of the hospital, because before you can start an alcohol withdrawal, you have to wean, because if you stop drinking just like that, even if you don't want it, you could have a seizure.
Well, it's really powerful stuff. Melissa Rice and Jade Y join us now. More, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
It is. I've listened to the bit of the pod. I think the first podcast that's out this morning, isn't it?
Yes.
It's clearly emotional. But just tell us, why did you want to make it?
I suppose the reason why we wanted to make it was addiction and recovery. It just felt like a bit of a dirty word, really misrepresented, and a lot of stigma attached to it. And when the Rachel Bland New Podcast Award brief came out, it was the brief lent itself really well to our story and to addiction, you know, a subject that nobody wanted to talk about, that was light and dark, misrepresented. So we kind of, between ourselves, thought, you know what, we'll give this a try. And
yeah, it was a risk to take, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But like a friend of mine said, like, we took so many risks in active addiction that actually this is a risk that means something, and we really believe in like what can be achieved with it.
And in terms of the relationship between the pair of you, how far back does that go? Where did you meet, Jade?
2 years on the 10th of October.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Remember precisely because
we met in a treatment centre. We met at a rehab, and we bonded over our irrational fears and anxieties, I think.
So Jade was the first person who I ever met, because the thing with addiction is it's really isolating. It's really isolating. So before I went into residential treatment, I was unable to identify or connect with anybody, because I thought I was a failure. It was all, like, nobody else was going through what I was going through. And Jade was the first person who I'd met who had exactly the same catastrophic thinking as I had. And I was like, this is a revelation.
I guess the difference is I didn't appreciate like the gift of treatment and what was being given to me.
Yeah.
To me, it felt like a bit of a punishment, whereas for Melissa, she was like, I'm just so happy to be around people.
I did. I loved it. I did.
just explain, because you were both you were holding down jobs as well as having addictions. Jay, just tell us a little bit about, you know, where you had got to before you went into rehabilitation.
So just before I went into rehab, I had come from a psychiatric hospital, and prior to that, I'd been in a general hospital. I'd made an attempt to end my life, and I'd ended up in a coma due to that. And I think that's important, because even after that point, I couldn't stop using drugs. In the hospital, I was using drugs. And that just shows to me like the extent of where my addiction had taken me.
It's still hard, this, isn't talking about it. I noticed you put your hand on Jade's leg, because no, I can see that you're nervous talking about this morning, and even though it's probably quite helpful for you and obviously helpful to so many people who are listening, it's still uncomfortable, isn't it, Melissa?
I think the thing about recovery, what people may not understand, is our past is our greatest asset. So we're used to talking about those lowest points, because they're what keep us well and keep us going forward, so we don't have to revisit the past, and that'll never happen again. But it still doesn't take the sting out. It's still painful, because I know I look back at the person who I was 2 years ago, and I look back with compassion, and I look back and I just want to give that girl a hug. But yeah, it can happen, as the whole point of the podcast is. It can happen to anyone, regardless of occupation, education, social standing, whether you're educated or not.
Yeah.
And
I think in so many ways as well that I know from my own personal experience, I've spoken about it, that can feed into it. Because I was in complete denial because of my job for a long time.
It's almost two separate lives.
Yeah, I didn't think it was possible that I could be an addict because I had that status, had that title. And then when I did realise that I was and I needed help, I was trapped in a situation where I didn't feel that I could seek help because of the stigma attached.
And the shame
and the
as
shame,
well.
yeah.
It's so Rachel Bland's podcast, You, Me and the Big C is called, isn't it? Has really changed the conversation around
phenomenal.
cancer. Are you hoping that in some ways you can begin to start doing this for addiction and the impact it has on people? And that, it's an optimistic note in many ways, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think like we spoke this morning, didn't we, saying that when we were in addiction, there wasn't anybody that we could identify with. We didn't know that help and support really was out there. I'd never heard of the word recovery.
No. I just thought, if someone would have told me, you can get well, you can make a difference, you can help somebody else, I wouldn't, I would never have believed you. But to go back to your question, I hope we can have the same impact on the recovery and the addiction community as You, Me and the Big C has, because it's phenomenal. And it's just a true honour to be able to carry on that legacy and be the first winners of it. It's just an honour.
I'm sure it'll have a big impact. You talk about how, what happened to you in the past sort of gives you a bit of strength.
Yeah.
When you look back now at some of the things, and I know one of the things you talk about is having Jack Daniels on your cereal. I mean,
At Glastonbury. There are other festivals.
But do you look back at that as something that you did that was normal now? How do you see that in sort of the light that you now have in your life?
Sometimes I think, well, I was young and I used age to justify my behaviour, if I'm being honest. Oh, this is what I do. I'm in my early 20s. I'm wild. I'm this and that. But actually, when I look back, I think, oh, you had a problem. There was something not quite right about the reason. It was the intention of why I was drinking. I was drinking to remove myself, and then that coping strategy and that reliance and that dependence to change how I felt just kind of snowballed, and it became more and more progressive. And what started out as being this fun-loving party girl in my early 20s turned into, a really unhealthy coping strategy that took over, which was,
Thank you both very much for coming in to
you.
talk to us. As I said, I've listened to some of it, and it's really powerful stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And Hooked is available on BBC Sounds from today. First episode is on today. You did really well, by the way.
I love the way you can have a hug. It's like,
and if you've been affected by any of the issues that we've just heard Melissa and Jade talk about, then you can find a list of charities that can help on the BBC Action Line as well on that website. The address, it's not on the screen, but I'll tell you it, www.bbc.co.uk/Action Line.